A young, dumb, disgusting boy named Jin Young found himself at the mercy of neighborhood bullies who took great pleasure in teasing him for being an orphan and claiming he was infected with the dreaded cooties. Just as the tears began to fall, his older sister Hannah stormed onto the scene with a roar that sent the troublemakers running for their lives. After she finished teaching them a painful lesson in manners, she knelt down to comfort her brother and promised to be his mother, his father, and everything in between. In that moment of pure gratitude, little Jin Young decided he would marry her when he grew up, though Hannah simply smiled and suggested that he should focus on eating his vegetables before making such life-altering decisions. Many years later, the once sweet bond between the siblings has turned into a daily struggle for survival. Hannah has replaced her gentle words of encouragement with a morning routine that involves putting Jin Young in a professional wrestling hold to make sure he is not late for his college classes. As Jin Young felt his spine cracking under her grip, he found himself wondering if his family was wealthy enough to settle a lawsuit for domestic violence. Downstairs, the second sister named Yoon was busy maintaining the peace by preparing a massive breakfast and treating her grown siblings as if they were still toddlers who needed to be hand-fed. The atmosphere in the house stayed lively as Hannah casually walked around the apartment as if clothing were strictly optional. Jin Young found it impossible to focus on simple tasks like brushing his teeth, while his sister flaunted over with such casual confidence. Hannah seemed convinced that her younger brother was simply overwhelmed by her incredible looks, but Jin Young countered by pointing out that a great persona was quite useless for someone who had never even managed to find a boyfriend. This remark left Hannah fuming as she headed off to work, while Jin Young started his walk to school, only to be intercepted by his eccentric neighborhood friend. Shin was never one for subtlety and took great pleasure in teasing Jin Young about his sisters. She spoke of how lucky he was to live with such beautiful women and reminded him that since they were not related by blood, there were no legal barriers stopping him from seeing them in a different light. Jin Young could only sigh as he realized his friend had a mind that lived permanently in the gutters, and he tried his best to ignore her strange suggestions. Meanwhile, Hannah arrived at her office at a premier cosmetics company where she struggled to maintain her professional focus while still being annoyed by her brother's insults. Her boss, scientist named Miri, who rarely parted with her favorite teddy bear, noticed Hannah's bad mood and offered a solution in the form of a new lab innovation. Miri revealed a small bottle of pink perfume that she claimed would make any man lose his composure instantly. Despite her initial protests, Hannah found herself taking the mysterious bottle home and wondering who she could possibly use it on. Returning home to a quiet apartment late that night, Hannah realized that Yoon was supposed to be staying overnight at her workplace. She expected to find Jin Young alone in his room, but as she climbed the stairs, she heard strange and suggestive sounds coming from behind his door. Pushing the door open with a look of pure shock, she discovered her brother in an incredibly sussy situation with the supposedly absent Yoon, leaving her to stare in total disbelief as her world turned upside down. The scene shifted as Hannah walked into her brother's room, expecting a dramatic confrontation, only to find him in a rather compromising position with his computer screen. Instead of looking away like a normal sibling might, she decided the best course of action was to document his ultimate embarrassment with her phone. Jin Young was absolutely mortified and demanded to know why she lacked the basic decency to knock, but Hannah was too busy enjoying her new collection of blackmail material. She teased him about being all grown up now and suggested that the whole world might be interested in seeing his current hobby. This led to a heated sibling argument where Jin Young fired back with a comment that truly stung by pointing out that she had never actually been in a real relationship herself. Hannah grew defensive and claimed she was only single because she chose to focus all her energy on her ungrateful siblings, but Jin Young dared her to prove her confidence by actually finding a partner for once. He eventually kicked her out of the room so he could finally prepare his clothes back on, leaving Hannah to fuming in the hallway. Back in her own room, Hannah's frustration only grew as she sat there feeling unappreciated for all her hard work. She looked at the mysterious pink bottle of perfume her boss had given her and realized it was the perfect tool for a bit of petty revenge. She imagined that spraying a little bit of the untested lab experiment in his room would be a hilarious punishment that would keep him awake and uncomfortable all night long. As she plotted her prank, she briefly drifted into a memory of a time when Jin Young was just a sweet little boy who brought her lunch at her part-time job. She found it hard to believe that the adorable child who used to follow her around had transformed into such a troublesome adult. Her peaceful night was cut short when a very distressed Jin Young suddenly woke her up in the middle of the night. He stood over her bed looking absolutely panicked and explained that something was wrong with him that he could not explain. Hannah yawned and tried to dismiss him at first, but she quickly realized that he was dealing with an incredibly persistent medical emergency that refused to go away. It took her a moment to connect the dots and realize that the perfume she used as a prank was far more powerful than she had imagined. Jin Young looked like he was in genuine pain and even suggested calling for an ambulance, because he felt like he was about to reach a breaking point. Hannah felt a wave of guilt wash over her as she realized she had used an untested chemical on her own brother just to win an argument. Since she was the one who created this awkward situation and there was no time to wait for professional help, she decided she had to take full responsibility. She sighed and told him to get ready for some very unconventional help because she was going to have to lend him a hand to fix the problem her prank had started. Their family history was defined by a father who seemed to treat marriage like a hobby, repeatedly bringing new mothers and siblings into their lives before eventually vanishing overseas with nothing but a brief letter as an explanation. This left the non-blood-related siblings to fend for themselves, which led Hannah to make a solemn vow that she would never follow in his irresponsible footsteps. She promised herself that she would protect her younger siblings at all costs, though she never could have imagined that her protective nature would lead to such a complicated situation. Waking up the next morning, Hannah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the gravity of her recent choices began to sink in. She felt as though she had completely lost her mind, realizing that her plan for a harmless prank had spiraled into something far more sussy than she ever intended. Looking over at Jin Young, who was sleeping peacefully like a baby without a single worry in the world, she found it difficult to reconcile his innocent appearance with the intensity of their encounter. She knew she needed to calm down and find a way to navigate this new reality, but the weight of the secret felt like it was crushing her. Breakfast was a lesson in extreme awkwardness, as Hannah and Jin Young sat at the table trying their best to avoid eye contact, while Sweet Yoon remained blissfully unaware of the tension. Yoon cheerfully commented on how much she missed their childhood days and playfully demanded her own turn to have a sleepover, which nearly caused the other two to choke on their food. Hannah hid behind her phone while Jin Young focused intently on his sandwich, both of them sweating under the pressure of maintaining a normal appearance. When Jin Young finally bolted out the door for a run to clear his head, Yoon was left wondering why her siblings were acting so strangely. The following days did not bring much relief, especially since Hannah could not get a hold of her boss to ask about the mysterious perfume she had used. She felt a lingering sense of discomfort, realizing that the lab experiment had side effects she was completely unprepared for. Meanwhile, Jin Young's attempt to find peace during his run was thwarted by his friend Shin, who seemed to have a supernatural ability to sense when something scandalous had occurred. She teased him about his household's unique atmosphere, sending him into a panic when he received a very casual text from Hannah asking him to pick up a specific medical errand at the pharmacy. Returning home, Jin Young hoped for a quiet moment to process everything, but instead, he found a trail of discarded clothes leading to the bathroom. He complained to himself about Hannah's lack of tidiness and decided to help by picking them up, though he quickly found himself distracted by the lingering scent of the perfume from the night before. Just as he was lost in a very internal and very blushing debate about his own maturity, Hannah stepped out of the shower. The two stood frozen in a moment of pure silence, as Hannah realized her brother was standing in the hallway holding her most sussy belongings, leaving them both to wonder how their relationship could possibly get any more complicated. Jin Young stood in the hallway caught red-handed with his sister's laundry, trying to explain through his sweat and stutters that he was only trying to help clean up the mess. Hannah was not buying the story for a second and scolded him for not using the laundry basket as they were always told to do. She teased him about his sudden interest in her wardrobe, suggesting that perhaps he was becoming a bit too curious about her lately. Jin Young was mortified and begged her to at least be decent while she walked through the house, but Hannah was perfectly comfortable in her own home and wondered why her brother was acting so repulsed by her presence. The situation grew even more stressful when Hannah demanded to know if he had managed to complete the urgent medical errand she had texted him about. Jin Young had to admit his failure, explaining that the pharmacist was not willing to hand over a prescription-level pill to a young man with no paperwork. Hannah was absolutely furious at his perceived incompetence and playfully hit him for forgetting such a vital task. She realized that she would eventually have to see a doctor herself to fix the mess he could not handle, leaving Jin Young to nurse his pride and his aching back. As the sun rose on a quiet Sunday morning, both siblings were drowning in a sea of awkward memories that refused to fade away. They sat at the breakfast table with Sweet Yoon, who had returned with groceries and a cheerful attitude that only made the silence heavier. Hannah found it nearly impossible to walk normally, wobbling across the room as if she had just survived a grueling physical marathon. Yoon noticed her sister's strange gait and wondered if she had sustained some kind of injury during her busy work week, while the other two struggled to maintain a shred of normalcy. The breakfast tension reached a breaking point when Jin Young accidentally dropped his chopsticks. Diving under the table to retrieve them, he was met with a view of his sister's long legs that sent his heart racing all over again. He struggled to keep his thoughts in check and his eyes forward, but the exquisite sight confirmed that his brain was officially starting to malfunction. Hannah sensed his distraction and teased him for falling asleep on the floor, which led to a flustered Jin Young making up a quick excuse about the chopsticks being hard to reach. Later that night, Jin Young lay in bed trying to convince himself that he just needed a good night's sleep to return to his old life. He felt like he had been under some kind of strange spell ever since the night of the perfume incident, and he hoped that a quiet Sunday would reset his runaway imagination. He was suddenly jolted awake in the dark by a heavy and familiar presence, realizing that his sister was once again leaning over his bed with an expression that suggested her worries were far from over. Jin Young woke up with a start, his heart racing as he realized that the vivid and highly questionable dream he just had was not just a product of his imagination, but had left a very physical and very messy reminder behind. He sat up in a cold sweat, staring at the ceiling and wondering how his life had reached a point where his own subconscious was betraying him in such a scandalous manner. After a moment of total panic, he realized that he could not possibly leave the evidence in the laundry basket for his sisters to find, so he decided that a top-secret, middle-of-the-night cleaning mission was his only hope for survival. He crept out of his room into the pitch-black hallway, clutching his ruined laundry and moving with the stealth of a clumsy ninja. He was so focused on not making the floorboards creak that he did not notice the large, warm presence standing directly in his path until he walked face first into a very soft and very solid obstacle. The impact sent him stumbling back in a daze, and as his eyes adjusted to the shadows, he found himself staring up at Hannah, who looked like a looming shadow of judgment. Hannah stood there with her hands on her hips, looking completely unimpressed by her brother's pantsless state and his suspicious late-night activities. She demanded to know what he was doing, sneaking around in the dark, and what exactly he was hiding behind his back. Jin Young felt his heart drop into his stomach as she leaned in and noted a very familiar, lingering scent that she could not quite place. In a moment of pure, desperate inspiration, Jin Young blurted out the most embarrassing lie he could think of, claiming that he had suffered a childish bathroom accident and was simply trying to hide his shame before anyone noticed. The look of pure disbelief and pity on Hannah's face was almost worse than being caught red-handed. She stared at her grown brother as if he were a particularly disappointing toddler and told him to just go back to bed while the rest of the house was still asleep. She watched him scurry away, feeling a strange mix of sisterly concern and a very confusing internal heat that she could not explain. As she retreated to her own room, she realized that ever since she had caught a whiff of that strange perfume, her body felt like it was operating on a completely different frequency. The weekend passed in a blur of restless nights and distracting thoughts for Hannah, who found it impossible to look at her brother without her heart doing a nervous dance. By the time Monday morning rolled around, she was a walking disaster, staggering through the office hallways with a daze that suggested she had not slept a single wink. Her primary goal was to find her eccentric boss, Miri, and demand answers about the pink bottle that had turned her life into a chaotic mess. However, when she arrived at the lab, she found a scene of total destruction, with caution tape everywhere, and rumors circulating that the lead scientist had vanished under very mysterious circumstances. Desperate for any clue, Hannah noticed Miri's favorite teddy bear sitting alone on a desk and wondered if her boss had left a secret message hidden inside the toy. As she picked it up, the bear suddenly barked a warning at her to keep her hands off, nearly causing Hannah to jump out of her skin. After the initial shock wore off, she discovered a small USB drive tucked away in the bear's stuffing. She quickly plugged it into a computer and was greeted by a pre-recorded video of a cheerful Miri, who explained that the perfume was a revolutionary pheromone-altering substance designed to permanently change how people perceive those closest to them. Miri's video explained that the chemical worked by rewriting the brain's natural social boundaries, ensuring that the spark of attraction would never fade and would instead feel new every single day. The scientist casually mentioned that she had not actually tested for side effects yet, but she figured that, since the users were young, they should just enjoy the ride. Hannah felt the world spinning as she realized the horrifying truth that the perfume's effects were not temporary, but had permanently altered the way she and Jin Young interacted on a biological. Walking home that evening, Hannah felt like she was carrying the weight of a monumental secret that could ruin her family forever. She wondered if she should force Jin Young to move out to save them both, but she knew she could not afford to pay for another apartment, and she certainly did not want to be alone. Despite the looming sense of dread, she felt a strange, flickering hope that things might actually turn out all right, even if the situation was undeniably complicated. When she finally stepped through the front door, she was greeted by a quiet house and the news that Yoon had already gone to bed after an exhausting day at the kindergarten. This meant she was alone with Jin Young, who was lounging on the couch and looking far too comfortable for someone who had caused so much internal turmoil. Hannah tried to act normal and announced her intention to take a long shower, but her voice was trembling so much that Jin Young noticed something was wrong. He looked her up and down and wondered if she was having a medical emergency, but before she could snap back at him, he hit her with a request that made her entire world freeze. He casually asked if she would give him a massage once she was finished in the bathroom, leaving Hannah standing there in total shock as she realized that her night was about to get much more difficult. Jin Young caught Hannah completely off guard by suggesting a massage later that night, and the look of sheer panic on her face suggested she was thinking several steps ahead. She immediately suspected that her brother had a hidden motive and was simply looking for a way to get his hands on her while she was still damp from the shower. She realized that if she voiced her concerns, it would only make her look like the one with the sussy thoughts, so she decided to keep her mouth shut and pretend everything was perfectly normal. She initially tried to brush him off by claiming she was not that tired and telling him to just go to sleep, but Jin Young was not about to take no for an answer. He began a relentless sales pitch, claiming to be a self-taught master of the craft thanks to some questionable videos he found on the internet. He even tried to turn it into a business transaction by offering his services for a steep fee, though he quickly began lowering his price when he realized his sister was not buying what he was selling. The price kept dropping from 10,000 won down to a mere 3,000 until he was practically begging to do the work for free. Hannah found his sudden burst of generosity highly suspicious, but eventually, she decided that he was becoming far too annoying to ignore and gave in. She told him his performance better be worth the trouble, but when Jin Young suggested she might want to shower or change into something more comfortable first, she realized he was being way too obvious about his intentions. She claimed that all her built-up fatigue was hitting her at once and that a shower after the treatment would be much better. She flopped onto the couch and warned him that if he took too long to get started, she would just give up and go to bed. Jin Young nervously took his place behind her and began working on her shoulders, which actually felt surprisingly good. Hannah was impressed by the strength in his hands and started to think that maybe she should take advantage of his new hobby more often. She even encouraged him to go harder, assuming that he was just highly motivated by the lingering effects of the perfume. However, the peaceful moment was ruined when Jin Young's hands grew a bit too enthusiastic and wandered into territory that was definitely not on the menu. Hannah shouted at him to stop, but Jin Young tried to play it off with a ridiculous medical excuse about stimulating her lymphatic glands for better health. Hannah was not fooled by his fake science for a second, and eventually had to physically kick him off the couch to get some breathing room. Even though she was flustered, she eventually found herself lying back down and demanding a leg massage instead because her calves were aching from a long day. The tension between them was becoming impossible to ignore, and it was clear that the simple days of being normal siblings were long gone. Later that evening, the two found themselves back in their usual state of bickering while sharing the couch. Jin Young complained about not having enough room to relax and asked Hannah to move, but she flatly refused because she was perfectly comfortable where she was. When Jin Young mumbled a particularly rude comment under his breath about her physique, Hannah demanded to know what he just said. He bluntly told her that her backside was far too large for the space available, which sent her into a fit of sibling rage. She accused him of having a death wish and claimed he clearly had no idea what he was talking about. To settle the argument, Jin Young proposed a bet involving 10 forehead flicks if he could prove her wrong. Hannah was confused about how he planned to verify his claims, but she was so confident in her own looks that she turned around and told him he was more than welcome to check for himself. The morning started with another round of biological chaos in the bathroom, where Jin Young managed to make a total mess of Hannah's carefully applied office makeup. Hannah was absolutely fuming, comparing her face to a stack of pancakes and his handiwork to unwanted syrup. She told him that if he was going to be that clumsy, he might as well be more efficient about it next time, so she would not have to spend an extra hour fixing her face before a long day at the office. Hannah eventually made it to work, looking surprisingly vibrant despite the morning's stress. Her coworkers immediately noticed her glowing aura and commented on how much more cheerful she seemed lately. They joked that she used to walk around looking like a hungry predator on the hunt, but now she looked as satisfied as a lion after a 5-course meal. Hannah sipped her coffee and realized that they were not entirely wrong, as she found it hard to stay in a bad mood when her personal life had become so unexpectedly colorful. The peaceful office atmosphere was shattered when the receptionist announced that a handsome young man was waiting for Hannah at the front desk. The news was so shocking that Hannah sprayed her coffee everywhere in a very unladylike fashion. She sprinted toward the lobby, terrified that her brother was about to cause a scene in front of her professional peers. She found Jin Young standing there, looking like he walked off a fashion runway, and before he could even finish a cool greeting, she dragged him away to a private corner. Hannah demanded to know what he was doing at her workplace, and Jin Young casually held up her forgotten lunchbox with a smirk. He reminded her of the days when he was just a little boy who used to bring her food at her part-time jobs, causing Hannah's frustration to soften into a moment of sweet nostalgia. However, the sentimental mood vanished the second Jin Young claimed he had an urgent need to find the restroom and insisted that she show him the way immediately. Later that afternoon, Hannah had to hop on an urgent video conference while working from a private area. Her coworkers were incredibly impressed by her dedication, noting that she was the only one professional enough to wear a full business suit while working remotely. Hannah tried her best to maintain a serious expression, but it was becoming a monumental struggle because Jin Young was currently hiding under her desk and causing a very physical distraction. Every time she flinched or looked distressed, she blamed it on a slow internet connection and a lagging video feed. By the time the workday was over and everyone was back at home, the siblings had returned to their usual state of high-intensity bickering. Hannah was relaxing with some ice cream and flatly refused to give Jin Young a bite, suggesting that she might have a much tastier reward for him later if he behaved. The house grew even louder when Sweet Yoon returned with a fresh load of groceries to find Hannah literally using Jin Young's head as a footrest on the floor. Hannah claimed that Jin Young had tripped and spilled ice cream all over her face, while Jin Young fired back by complaining about her hygiene habits. He made a rude comment about her needing a shave, which nearly led to a second round of wrestling in the middle of the living room. Yoon could only watch the two of them with a look of exhausted suspicion, wondering why her siblings spent every waking moment either fighting or rubbing against each other in the most chaotic ways possible. Hannah enjoyed a rare moment of peace in the shower while humming a little tune and thinking about the predictable habits of her younger brother. She suspected the little rascal was currently outside the door, doing his best to act natural, even though she knew exactly what was on his mind. She imagined a scenario where she would pretend to be a victim of circumstance later that night, while secretly planning to make the most of every second of his undivided attention. Her internal monologue was interrupted by a sudden wave of nostalgia regarding her other sister, named Yoon, who had always been a bit of a unique soul. Hannah remembered that despite being 2 years younger, Yoon had always been surprisingly mature and responsible compared to the rest of the household. She had a heart of pure gold and a level of innocence that made her believe almost anything she was told, which often left Hannah feeling a mix of admiration and worry. In the old days, Yoon would constantly chase Hannah down to make sure she didn't leave for work or school without a proper lunch, while Hannah was always in too much of a hurry to notice the small details. The peaceful shower took a turn for the awkward when Yoon suddenly walked into the bathroom and suggested they wash up together like they used to do in the past. Hannah nearly jumped out of her skin because her mind was already racing with secrets that she definitely did not want her sister to discover. She tried to brush off her startled reaction as just talking to herself, but her heart was hammering against her ribs with the fear that her recent activities with Jin Young were no longer a secret. The tension reached a boiling point when Yoon began washing Hannah's back and casually mentioned that she had never noticed a specific mole located under Hannah's left side before. Hannah froze in total shock as she realized that Jin Young had mentioned that exact same detail during a recent conversation, and she wondered how on earth he could have been so careless as to tell Yoon about it. She felt a surge of panic as she realized that her brother's big mouth might have just ruined their carefully constructed facade of normalcy. Looking at Yoon's smiling face, Hannah's mind drifted back to the difficult years after their father vanished and left the 4 unrelated siblings to fend for themselves. Hannah had sacrificed her entire youth and worked countless part-time jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and ensure everyone was fed. She remembered the sheer exhaustion of those days and how it all felt worth it when her siblings surprised her with a secret birthday party, complete with a homemade cake and paper flowers. Back in the present moment, Hannah felt a deep pang of guilt for the way she had been handling things lately. She realized that she had been putting all the blame on her younger brother just to satisfy her own desires, and she couldn't help but feel like she was failing as an older sister. Despite the complicated web of biological alterations and secret encounters, she knew that they were still a family first and foremost. She looked at the paper, rose in her memory, and promised herself that they would eventually find their way back to a normal life, even if the path forward seemed a bit slippery. Jin Young lounges on the sofa with a look of deep contemplation as he tries to make sense of the current atmosphere in the house. He finds himself wondering if Hannah is genuinely acting strange, or if she has simply managed to return to her normal self after the chaos of the last few days. His mind drifts back to the previous evening, starting with the moment the youngest sister, Yoon, decided to call it a night. She offered a sleepy warning for him to get some rest before her graceful exit, leaving Jin Young alone in the quiet living room. He waited for 10 long minutes, just to be absolutely sure the coast was clear, before switching off the lights and creeping toward the stairs. There was a specific kind of secret thrill in the air as he stood outside Hannah's door, savoring the brief moment of anticipation before he finally decided to knock. When the door creaked open, Hannah was standing there with an expression that was far from the welcoming one he expected. Jin Young tried to maintain his cool and playfully suggested they have another one of their private chats inside the comfort of her room. To his utter surprise, Hannah was not interested in his charms at all and told him to say whatever he had to say right there in the hallway. He felt a moment of confusion, but quickly convinced himself that she was simply testing him by playing hard to get. Thinking he could push his luck, he reached out to her with a bold gesture he thought she would appreciate, but the response was a sharp slap to his hands that left him completely stunned. Hannah demanded to know who gave him the right to be so forward without her permission. She informed him that she had a busy workday ahead and intended to go to sleep immediately, leaving him with a stern command to stop his nonsense before slamming the door in his face. Back in the present, Jin Young realizes he hasn't even seen her face all day because she has been hiding in her room under the guise of working from home. He is pulled out of his thoughts when he hears her heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, but she doesn't even stop to acknowledge his presence. He scrambles to his feet and offers her a massage to help her relax from her long day, but she dismisses him with a cold and clinical efficiency. The real blow comes when she calmly states that she is going to find him his own apartment so he can move out as soon as possible. Jin Young is left speechless, reminding her of the time she claimed they didn't have the money for such a major life change. Hana remains firm, promising to work every bit of overtime necessary just to ensure he has a place of his own. As the front door clicks shut behind her, Jin Young stands alone in the hallway, wondering if the intense moments they shared recently were nothing more than a very vivid dream. He quickly pulls out his phone to check the secret evidence he recorded, confirming to himself that their recent encounters were very much a reality. He gets so lost in the digital memories that he fails to hear Yoon sneaking up behind him with a look of extreme curiosity. She catches him in a state of visible excitement and assumes he is simply indulging in some sussy internet hobbies that are none of her business. To clear the awkward air, she hands him a pair of admission tickets to a local water park, suggesting that he take Hana for a fun weekend getaway. Jin Young looks at the tickets and can't help but imagine a very sunny and very distracting trip ahead, realizing his sister's plan to kick him out might have to wait. Jin Young stands frozen in place as he tries to process the idea of a trip to the water park with Hana. The youngest sister Yoon explains that she has noticed the strange tension between them lately and worries about how much they have been fighting over the smallest things. She recalls mentioning during their recent bath time that Hana should be a bit nicer to her brother, but it seems like the atmosphere in the house has not improved at all. She has come up with a simple plan based on her experience at the kindergarten, where playing together always helps people become the best of friends. Jin Young finds himself pausing as he thinks about returning to the good old times with his sister, though his current definition of quality time involves much more intense and sussy memories than his innocent sister could ever imagine. Feeling a sudden surge of motivation, he promises to take on the challenge and make his youngest sister proud. Hana soon joins them in the living room, but she is far from enthusiastic about the idea of a crowded water park, and simply states that she intends to spend her weekend being lazy at home. She even suggests that Jin Young should just take Yoon instead, which leaves the poor boy feeling like his weekend plans are falling apart before they even begin. However, Yoon is one step ahead and suddenly appears with a cleaning mask and a vacuum, creating a whirlwind of noise as she declares her intention to deep clean the entire house for the rest of the day. She essentially dusts Hana right out the front door, telling them both to stay out until dinner and enjoy their time together while she takes care of the chores. As the two siblings walk down the street together, Jin Young feels a flutter of excitement, realizing that this essentially feels like a real outing. He thinks about how hard he has been working to keep his composure during their quiet nights at home and wonders what might happen now that they are heading to such a fun and distracting location. His peaceful daydream is shattered when a very sweaty and very clingy Shin suddenly pounces on him from behind, having just finished her morning jog. She is more than happy to share her athletic scent with him for free and quickly notices that the two siblings are out together on a beautiful morning. She jokingly wonders if they are on some kind of scandalous sibling outing, which sends Jin Young into a state of total panic about their family reputation. In a move that catches everyone by surprise, Hana actually invites Shin to join them and even offers to pay for her ticket, which leaves Shin bowing in gratitude. Jin Young feels his heart sink as he realizes his private afternoon with Hana has been officially hijacked by his most eccentric friend. Hana looks quite relieved to have a buffer between her and her brother, while Jin Young can only imagine how much more complicated his future is about to become. Upon arriving at the newly opened water park, Jin Young stands by the pool feeling frustrated and wondering how he managed to get himself into such a mess. Hana steps out in her swimwear and calmly advises him to warm up properly, so he does not have a physical accident in the water, leaving the poor boy struggling to maintain his focus in the bright summer sun. Hana stands tall in the bright afternoon sun, looking remarkably confident in her black swimwear as she reminds Jin Young to warm up properly before entering the pool. She warns him that he certainly wouldn't want to suffer a sudden physical mishap in the water, though her casual advice only makes it harder for him to maintain his composure. Jin Young finds himself staring in a state of total disbelief, realizing that this is the very first time he has ever seen his sister dressed for a day at the beach. He struggles to swallow his nerves and thinks that her appearance is far too distracting for his own good, especially as she turns around and begins to walk away with an effortless grace that leaves him feeling completely overwhelmed. His internal debate is suddenly interrupted by the arrival of his eccentric friend Shin, who has made a fashion choice that is impossible to ignore. Instead of a traditional swimsuit, she has opted for a full-body ensemble consisting of a turtleneck and a bulky life vest, all tucked neatly inside a giant purple inflatable tube. She proudly announces that she worked incredibly hard to find this specific outfit at the rental shop and reminds Jin Young that she is a track and field girl who cannot swim to save her life. She teasingly claims that she chose such a modest look specifically to avoid outshining Hannah, and she encourages Jin Young to just pretend she isn't even there so he can focus on his sister. Jin Young can only sigh in frustration, realizing that her energetic presence is far too loud to be disregarded. Meanwhile, Hannah decides that the best way to handle her complicated feelings is to put some distance between herself and the younger pair. She tells herself that their current living situation has become far too strange and that she should find a quiet corner to hide in for the rest of the afternoon. She watches from afar as Shin and Jin Young begin to splash around, hoping that spending time with a girl his own age will help her brother move on and realize that she is not the only woman in the world. However, as she sees Shin clinging tightly to Jin Young for a piggyback ride in the deep end, a wave of unexpected jealousy washes over her. She feels a heavy tightness in her chest and realizes that her plan to set them up is actually making her feel quite miserable, despite her promises to stay professional and sisterly. Hannah tries her best to pull herself together and focus on the clouds, but her peace is shattered when a random stranger with sunglasses and a very arrogant grin approaches her. The man assumes she is lonely and offers to play with her, acting as if he is doing her a massive favor by sharing his company. Hannah is immediately repulsed by his behavior, as his aggressive and self-centered attitude reminds her far too much of the playboy father she has spent her entire life despising. She tries to dismiss him with a few sharp words, but the stranger refuses to take the hint and begins to mock her, suggesting that she must be single because of her terrible attitude. He even goes so far as to claim he can help her gain some life experience, reaching out with a predatory hand to grab her arm. The situation turns tense as the stranger loses his temper. But before he can do any more harm, a firm hand suddenly clamps down on his wrist, with a strength that catches everyone by surprise. Jin Young has appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his face twisted into a dark and protective scowl that signals he is in no mood for games. He stands protectively in front of Hannah and stares the man down, demanding to know exactly what he thinks he is saying to his sister. Jin Young continues to stare down the arrogant stranger with a look of pure intensity as he demands to know exactly what the man was trying to say to his sister. The stranger is momentarily caught off guard, but quickly tries to regain his composure by acting as if he was simply offering a harmless compliment to a beautiful woman. He decides that the atmosphere has become a bit too heavy for his liking and offers a casual wave before jogging away, telling the pair to enjoy the rest of their afternoon. As he retreats, he reflects on his long career as a self-proclaimed expert in meeting women and realizes that Jin Young gave him a feeling he had never experienced before. Most men react to a challenge by being either a protective boyfriend or a concerned family member, but the stranger realized with a shiver that Jin Young's eyes were projecting both of those feelings at the exact same time. Back at the edge of the pool, the high-stakes drama fades into a moment of sibling teasing as Hannah notices that her brother's legs are visibly trembling. Jin Young tries to play it off as a simple case of being cold from the water, but Hannah isn't fooled for a second and realizes he was actually quite nervous during the confrontation. She gives him a gentle pat on the head and acknowledges that her younger brother is finally starting to look like a dependable person. The two of them spend the next few hours actually enjoying the water park, splashing each other and playing games until the earlier tension seems like a distant memory. Hannah feels more relaxed than she has in days, and even suggests that they should find something good to eat for dinner once they finish their swim. However, the peaceful afternoon takes a sudden and chaotic turn when Hannah realizes that a piece of her clothing has completely vanished into the depths of the pool. Jin Young spots the missing cloth floating away like a lost ship, and the two of them are hit with a wave of total panic. While Jin Young offers to run to the rental shop for a replacement, he quickly realizes that he is also stuck in the water because seeing his sister in such a state has left him far too distracted to stand up. They decide that the only way to handle this medical emergency is to find a quiet corner of the pool and help each other find some relief from the overwhelming situation. The secret encounter in the warm water feels like a surreal dream to Jin Young, who realizes it has been far too long since they shared such a cardio connection. He wonders why Hannah suddenly dropped her guard and became so receptive to his presence, but he is too focused on the moment to worry about the logistics. Their sussy time is nearly interrupted when Shin appears at the edge of the pool, looking for her friends with a suspicious expression. Hannah has to dive underwater and hide while Jin Young frantically tries to act natural, eventually convincing Shin to go and rent a new swimsuit for her. As the sun begins to set and the day at the water park comes to an end, the siblings find themselves on a quiet bus ride home. The exhaustion of the day finally catches up with the girls, leaving Shin and Hannah to drift off into a deep sleep against Jin Young's shoulders. He looks down at his sister and realizes that, despite all the complications and the permanent effects of the pink perfume, they are navigating this strange new reality together. He reaches out in a silent promise that he will always be there to protect her, no matter how slippery the path forward becomes. Ever since the trip to the water park, life at home for Jin-young and Hana seemed to return to its usual rhythm. They went back to being ordinary siblings who passed each other in the morning with tired yawns and a shared sense of casual indifference. Their interactions were once again filled with the same old bickering, such as when Hana decided the middle of the living room was the perfect place for her morning stretches. Jin-young found the sight quite distracting and complained about her choice of location, but Hana simply told him to mind his own business and walk around her while she focused on her health. Watching them argue felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from Yoon's shoulders because she was just happy to see them acting like themselves again. She gave them a gentle reminder to be nice to each other, feeling relieved that the earlier awkwardness had finally faded away. Little did she know that the peace she was enjoying was built on a very complicated cardio relationship that the two were carefully hiding behind closed doors. Even though they acted like they could barely tolerate each other in public, their relationship had actually evolved into a very coordinated and sussy arrangement. One afternoon, Jin-young was lounging on the sofa when Yoon tried to send him on a quick errand for some snacks. He quickly brushed her off by claiming he already had important plans with a friend, making his way toward the door with a bit of a nervous fumble. As he stepped out, Yoon could not help but notice that everyone in the family seemed to be going for an unusual amount of solo strolls lately. Jin-young's real destination was actually a quiet local place where Hana was already waiting for him in a room. He was impressed by how clean and modern the place was, and Hana jokingly asked him if he had run all the way there just to see her. Inside the room, the two prepared for their cardio meeting with a level of routine that suggested this was becoming a regular habit. Jin-young began to change while they discussed the high ratings the establishment had received from other travelers online. Hana seemed a bit more hesitant to get started and even teased him about his eagerness, which led to the usual round of playful sibling insults. After their time together was finished, Hana warned him to stay away from the house for at least another 30 minutes, so they would not arrive at the same time and make Yoon suspicious of their activities. By the time Jin-young finally walked through the front door, Yoon was already busy in the kitchen preparing a large meal for the family. Hana was sitting at the table looking perfectly composed as if she had been home for hours, and she even found the time to scold him for being late. During dinner, Hana casually dropped the news that she would be heading to Italy for a 10-day business trip starting the very next afternoon. Yoon was incredibly jealous of the idea of a European getaway, but Hana reminded her that she was going there for work and promised to bring back plenty of gifts for everyone. Jin-young's mind immediately began to race as he realized that 10 days abroad meant they would be unable to share any of their cardio moments for a very long time. He tried to maintain a serious expression while eating his dinner, but his composure was completely shattered when Hana decided to tease him. He let out a sudden noise of distress that caught Yoon's attention, but he quickly covered for himself by claiming he had just received a painful static shock from his seat. Hana gave him a sussy smile and told him to behave himself while she was away, suggesting that she still had a lot of energy to burn before they went to sleep for the night. Yoon was a dedicated kindergarten teacher who took great pride in watching over her students with a sharp eye and a gentle heart. However, on this particular morning, she found it impossible to focus on the children because her mind was completely overwhelmed by the events of the previous night. She had woken up in the early hours of the morning feeling thirsty and had decided to head to the kitchen for a glass of water, only to notice that the lights were still on in Hana's room. Thinking her sister might still be packing for her business trip, she decided to take a quick peek inside, only to witness a scene that was far more intense and sussy than she ever could have imagined. The unfiltered words she heard coming from her older sister and the sheer intensity of the encounter left Yoon in a state of total shock as she realized her siblings were sharing a cardio connection that defied every rule of normalcy she understood. Back at the kindergarten, she could do nothing but sigh deeply as she sat at her desk, feeling like her world had been turned upside down by a single discovery. Her boss noticed her long face and wondered if something was the matter, and a flustered Yoon could only explain that one of her students had made a very serious mistake. She felt that the error was so monumental that she didn't even know how to begin reprimanding them for their behavior. Her boss offered a bit of professional advice by explaining the importance of immediate feedback, suggesting that a child should be corrected right on the spot when they do something wrong. The idea was to help the student realize their own mistake the moment it happened, rather than waiting until later when the lesson might no longer register. Yoon felt a sudden surge of inspiration as she realized that this preschool teaching strategy was exactly what she needed to handle her wayward brother. She decided she would do her best to set Jin-young straight by catching him in the act and teaching him a lesson about boundaries he would never forget. She came up with a plan to test his morals while Hana was away on her business trip, deciding that she would essentially tease him to see if he would cross the line with her as well. She spent her afternoon searching for strategies online and even looked up how to create a more distracting atmosphere at home. When Jin-young finally returned from school that evening, he found Yoon waiting for him in a sussy dress that was far more elegant than anything he had ever seen her wear. He was visibly taken aback by her new look, but Yoon simply claimed that all her other clothes were currently in the wash, and this was her only option. Encouraged by his initial surprise, Yoon decided to move on to the next phase of her operation by being extra affectionate and helpful. She offered to turn on the warm water for his shower, and even tried to comfort him on the sofa afterward, claiming it was nice for just the two of them to spend some time together. She even went so far as to dry his hair with a towel, hoping that her proximity would cause him to lose his composure. However, Jin-young seemed completely uninterested in her efforts and was far more focused on the baseball game playing on the television, even asking her if she could finish the hair drying later so he wouldn't miss a play. Yoon felt a wave of sadness wash over her as she realized her brother was treating her with the same casual indifference as always, and she wondered if her plan was failing because she simply wasn't as distracting as Hannah. She began to doubt herself, wondering if she needed to search for even more aggressive strategies to get a reaction out of him. Eventually, the exhaustion of her sleepless night caught up with her, and she drifted into a deep sleep right there on the sofa. As she slept, her mind wandered back to the days when Jin-young was just a sweet little boy who followed her around and begged her for hamburgers. She missed how cute and innocent he used to be and wished he would act like that little kid again. Her peaceful dream was suddenly interrupted when she woke up and realized that something felt very strange, noticing that Jin-young was now very close to her and was currently paying her an amount of undivided attention that she was definitely not prepared for. The atmosphere at dinner was surprisingly peaceful as Jin-young and Yoon shared a meal filled with the familiar sounds of clattering chopsticks. Yoon played her usual role of the responsible sister by reminding him to eat his vegetables, while Jin-young playfully insisted that he had already finished his portion when she was not looking. He was on his best behavior, even offering to handle the laundry and take care of the mountain of dishes in the sink. Yoon was touched by his sudden burst of helpfulness, though she could not help but notice a sussy glint in his eyes that suggested he had a hidden motive for being such a gentleman. As the kitchen went quiet, the mood shifted into something far more intense when Jin-young reminded her that it had been quite a while since their last cardio session. He initiated their latest cardio lesson with a level of confidence that caught Yoon completely off guard, leading her to agree to his unconventional demands. He even requested her help in preparing his clothes, causing her mind to drift back to their childhood days, when such a task was just a normal part of playing at the park. Now that they were all grown up, the same simple action carried a weight of shyness and secrecy that left her heart racing and her face flushed with heat. The 10 days of Hannah's business trip had truly flown by, and Jin-young found himself staring at a string of teasing text messages from his oldest sister. Hannah was already planning her grand return and had sent him a cheeky warning to keep himself on his best behavior until she could personally make up for their lost time together. Yoon sensed the impending return of the household chaos and tentatively suggested that they should perhaps put an end to their sussy lessons before Hannah walked through the front door. Jin-young simply praised her for her hard work at the kindergarten, leaving her to wonder exactly where their boundaries truly lived. In a final attempt to complete her teaching strategy, Yoon found herself following Jin-young's difficult instructions to prepare her clothes without using her hands. Just as the house reached a peak of internal tension, the front door burst open with a loud announcement that the traveler had finally returned. Hannah marched into the apartment with her suitcase in tow, humming a happy tune and calling out to her siblings like they were a pair of lost puppies. During their reunion dinner, she complained about the exhaustion of eating foreign food and expressed how much she missed the taste of home-cooked meals. The evening continued with a round of souvenirs, as Hannah presented Yoon with a luxury handbag that looked like it cost a small fortune. She even mentioned a special gift for their neighbor, but when it came to Jin-young, she casually tossed a box of airport cookies in his direction. This led to the usual sibling bickering, with Jin-young complaining that she had not put any effort into finding him a proper gift from the city. Hannah just smiled and told him to stop his whining, but later she leaned in to whisper a secret that changed everything. She informed him that his real present was waiting for him in her bedroom, once the rest of the house was finally asleep. In the dead of night, Jin-young crept through the silent hallway and pushed open Hannah's door to find her waiting in expensive and highly distracting clothes and gear. She made it very clear that she was the one in charge tonight, demanding his full attention and leaving him with zero authority in the room. As they lost themselves in their long-awaited reunion, they were completely unaware that Yoon was standing right outside the door in the shadows. Listening to the familiar sounds of their cardio encounter, Yoon felt a crushing wave of frustration and realized that her attempt to set things right had only made the situation more complicated than she ever imagined. The morning started with Yoon displaying a level of enthusiasm that seemed a bit suspicious to her siblings as she bounced around the kitchen, serving up a massive breakfast with a wide smile and a sudden burst of motivation. Jin-young found himself staring at a literal mountain of rice that would challenge even a professional athlete, while Hannah wondered why their sister was suddenly treating a simple Tuesday morning like a celebratory banquet. The attention did not stop at the food, as Yoon leaned in to personally care for Jin Young's messy face with a sussy touch that left the boy flustered, and Hana questioning if this was just their sister's usual kindness or much more deliberate. After the siblings headed off to their separate lives of business reports and college lectures, the day eventually wound down with Hana announcing she would be staying late at the office to finish up her post-trip responsibilities. Jin Young was enjoying a peaceful walk home with his music turned up, completely unaware that Yoon was frantically chasing after him and trying to catch his attention from down the street. Once she finally caught her breath, she playfully scolded him for his dangerous habit of wearing headphones in public, before suggesting they spend some quality time together at the local supermarket. Their domestic errand took a turn for the chaotic when they ran into their eccentric friend Shin, who didn't hesitate to pull out her phone and document what she called their perfect newlywed energy. Yoon seemed a little too pleased with the comparison, while Jin Young tried his best to hide from the camera, eventually making their way home with a heavy load of groceries and a secret plan brewing in the quiet evening air. With the house temporarily empty and Hana's late return seemingly guaranteed, Yoon realized that it was the perfect opportunity for another round of their sussy educational sessions. She caught him by the sleeve and made it clear that dinner could wait, because she was incredibly eager to continue their cardio curriculum right then and there. The two retreated to the bathroom for a steaming session of shared cardio, feeling confident that they were completely safe behind the closed door. However, their world came crashing down when the front door clicked shut and Hana's voice echoed through the apartment, announcing that she had managed to finish her work much earlier than expected. Panic set in as they realized their older sister was heading straight for the bathroom to wash away her long day, leaving them trapped in a very steamy and very crowded situation that was about to get much more complicated. Hana often found herself reflecting on the bizarre turn her life had taken ever since that fateful day with the mysterious perfume. She had essentially accepted her new role in satisfying her younger brother's frequent requests, though she occasionally had to wonder if she had simply lost her mind along the way. Ever since the intense cardio encounter they shared at the water park, their daily routine had become a series of secret cardio sessions that seemed to define their relationship. However, a strange shift had occurred lately that left Hana feeling more than a bit unsettled. Jin Young had suddenly started making excuses to avoid their secret time, claiming he was simply too tired and needed to go to bed early. Even when they did find a moment together, he seemed completely unfocused, often stopping in the middle of their activities to check a text message on his phone. Hana began to worry that he was growing bored with her, even though her eccentric boss had personally guaranteed that the perfume would prevent such a thing from ever happening. Returning home one afternoon, Hana noticed a very specific expression on Sweet Yoon's face that sent a chill down her spine. It was a look of total satisfaction and lingering heat that Hana recognized all too well from her own experiences. She turned her attention to Jin Young and immediately spotted the exact same guilty face he used to make when they were children. It was the same look he wore when he would sneakily eat all of her snacks, or the time he accidentally ruined her old school uniforms because he wanted to win a dress-up contest. The atmosphere at dinner only served to increase her suspicions, because Jin Young was acting like a perfect gentleman. He made sure she had the best pieces of meat and even offered to give her a relaxing shoulder rub to help with her long day at the office. When he insisted that she should use the bathroom first and offered to wait patiently, Hana became convinced that he must be in some kind of serious trouble. She sat in her room, wondering if he had perhaps taken out a sketchy loan or broken something expensive that he was too afraid to tell her about. Her heart began to race when Jin Young finally knocked on her door and peeked inside with a nervous and sweaty expression. Hana tried her best to remain calm and promised that she wouldn't get angry as long as he told her the absolute truth about whatever was bothering him. After a long and awkward silence, Jin Young finally gathered his courage and made a very bold request to explore a brand new and much more invasive boundary. It turned out that Jin Young's new curiosity had started during his cardio lessons with Yoon. While the youngest sister had become surprisingly cooperative and even seemed to enjoy their constant cardio sessions, she had drawn a very firm line when it came to this specific request. She had lectured him about the proper functions of the body and insisted that the backdoor cardio arrangement was strictly for one purpose only, leaving Jin Young's growing curiosity completely unfulfilled. Hana listened in total disbelief as her brother admitted that his desire to try something new had been growing every single day. She realized that he was being a bit of a shameless person, and she decided to counter his request with a lifelong wish of her own. She imagined a scenario where she could use a baseball bat to deliver a very painful lesson in discipline, asking him if he would be willing to grant her wish if she granted his. Jin Young was horrified by the suggestion, and the two siblings reached a stalemate where both of their unconventional ideas were firmly rejected. Feeling completely overwhelmed by the conversation, Hana declared that she needed exactly 5 days to think everything over. She established a strict rule that there would be no cardio sessions of any kind during this cooling-off period, expecting that Jin Young would soon become restless and desperate for her attention. She headed off to work, feeling like she had regained some control over the situation. But the reality of the break proved to be much more difficult than she imagined. As the days passed, Hannah found herself struggling with a vivid and overactive imagination. She could practically hear suggestive noises echoing through the house, envisioning Jin-young and Yoon taking advantage of the quiet moments while she was away or sleeping. The internal pressure became so intense that she had to retreat to the office bathroom just to find some relief and settle her racing thoughts. She expected to find a frustrated and fussy Jin-young waiting for her at home, but instead, she was greeted by a brother who looked perfectly calm and happy. He waved to her with a cheerful smile and a bright morning greeting, appearing as if he didn't have a single worry in the world. This left a very restless Hannah, feeling completely defeated as she realized she was the only one struggling to make it through the final day of their agreement. Hannah eventually lost her patience and slammed her way into Jin-young's room, visibly annoyed that he had been ignoring her messages for far too long. Jin-young was simply lounging on his bed and tried to play it cool by claiming he was so lost in his music that he hadn't heard his phone buzzing right next to him. Hannah found his relaxed attitude quite irritating, especially since she was still dwelling on their earlier conversation about exploring a much more unconventional and restricted backyard territory. To her surprise, the once firm boundaries she had established seemed to be softening as Jin-young leaped to his feet and brought up his request again with a hopeful expression. Hannah found herself seriously considering the possibility, realizing that her own self-imposed 5-day break was starting to feel like a very long and exhausting marathon. She began to wonder if her brother had always been this focused on such a specific goal, or if his current persistence was just a sign of how much he had changed lately. Jin-young's mind drifted back to a childhood memory where he first learned a very specific and very troublesome prank from his eccentric friend, Shin. He recalled how his friend had encouraged him to test this new maneuver on both of his sisters, promising him it was a great way to bond. The experiment ended in a massive disaster and left him in more trouble than he could handle, though it clearly planted the seeds for his current curiosities. Even as a child, he was already showing a talent for finding the most complicated way to interact with his older siblings. Returning to his current reality, Jin-young realized that his schedule was becoming increasingly crowded and physically taxing. Ever since Sweet Yoon had started asking for her own private cardio lessons on a daily basis, he was essentially pulling double duty for both sisters. He reflected on how manageable life was when he only had one sister to worry about, but now that they were both demanding his undivided attention, he felt like he was constantly walking a tightrope without a safety net. The stress of his double life had turned him into a bundle of nerves, making him hypersensitive to every creak of the floorboards and every sudden knock on the door. He spent his secret time with one sister, constantly looking over his shoulder, terrified that the other would walk in and discover their sussy arrangement. He knew that his heart couldn't take much more of this high-stakes stealth mission, and realized there had to be a better way to coordinate his many commitments. As he sat at his desk and stared at his calendar, he noticed that a rare 3-day weekend was approaching on the following Friday. A sudden burst of inspiration hit him as he realized this could be the perfect opportunity to finally organize his chaotic life. He began to form a plan that would allow him to satisfy everyone's needs without the constant fear of getting caught. Feeling a wave of relief as he looked toward the upcoming holiday, Jin-young finally decided to unveil his master plan for a peaceful weekend by presenting his sisters with a pair of tickets to a luxurious spa retreat. He framed the gesture as a selfless reward for all their hard work. And while Hannah wondered how a college student could possibly afford such an expensive gift, Yoon was moved to tears by how much her little brother had matured. Little did they know that Jin-young's generosity was actually a desperate bid for 3 whole days of total isolation. He imagined a glorious weekend of freedom, where he could finally relax and indulge in his own private hobbies without the constant demands of his sister's secret cardio curriculum. However, his dreams of a solo staycation were shattered on the morning of the trip when Hannah and Yoon informed him that he was most definitely coming along for a full family getaway. Jin-young tried to use their roommate as a last-minute excuse to stay behind, but a cheerful Yoon explained that she had already filled the fridge with enough food to last a week. He found himself being dragged toward the train station in a state of total defeat, realizing that his elaborate plan to find some peace had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The journey proved to be a grueling test of Jin-young's composure, as he found himself sandwiched between his 2 beautiful sisters in the cramped seats of the train. While Yoon followed her usual routine of falling asleep the moment the wheels started moving, Hannah decided to take advantage of the quiet atmosphere by initiating a very risky and very public cardio session. Jin-young could only stare straight ahead in a state of absolute panic as his oldest sister pushed the boundaries of their secret arrangement right there in the middle of the passenger car. He realized with a heavy heart that his attempt to escape the household chaos had only led him into a situation where he was more trapped than ever before. Upon arriving at the resort, the siblings were greeted by a stunning room that even met Hannah's high standards for professional travel. The sisters wasted no time in teasing their brother for only booking a single room for the three of them, playfully suggesting that he simply couldn't bear to be separated from his favorite siblings for even a single night. Jin-young could only nurse his pride as he realized his sisters were far more observant and teasing than he had given them credit for. The evening eventually led them to the relaxing waters of the hot springs, where the sisters found themselves drawing far more attention than they expected. A curious child even pointed out their impressive figures, with a level of honesty that left the sisters blushing and the other patrons more than a bit flustered. As the steam rose around them, the conversation turned toward the future and the possibility of finding someone special to settle down with in the coming years. Hana claimed that she was still much too young and busy with her career to even think about marriage, but Yoon surprised her by admitting there was someone younger who had recently captured her heart. She explained that she was starting to see this person in a completely different light and had begun to rely on them for more than just casual company. Hana was thrilled by the news and encouraged her sister to pursue the relationship, even demanding a formal introduction if things eventually worked out. Yoon could only smile at the deep irony of the request, realizing that her older sister had no idea they were both currently relying on the exact same person to fulfill their most secret and sussy desires. The sisters looked radiant in their matching white robes as they fully embraced the luxury of the resort and prepared for a night of sibling bonding. The earlier tension seemed to evaporate as they dove into a competitive gaming session where Jin-young took great delight in pointing out his oldest sister's total lack of coordination. Hana was far from a gracious loser, and her vocal frustration filled the hallway, while sweet Yoon simply focused on the delicious traditional meal spread out before them. Later that evening, they retreated to a quiet common area where the rhythmic massage chairs worked their magic on their tired muscles. Jin-young finally felt like he was achieving a bit of the healing he had hoped for, even though his original plan for total solitude had been a complete failure. This brief moment of peace was short-lived when a blinded Hana, wearing a sleep mask, wandered into his personal space and created a very crowded situation in his chair. When Yoon noticed her sister was missing from her seat, Jin-young had to think fast and made up a story about a sudden bout of motion sickness to explain why Hana was currently hiding right on top of him. Back in their shared room, the siblings gathered around the collection of snacks and drinks Hana had secretly stockpiled from a convenience store earlier that day. Expressed how proud she was that her younger brother was finally old enough to join them for a proper toast, though she soon began to show her own lack of tolerance for the beverages. The conversation turned toward their sussy lives, with Hana playfully mocking her brother for his lack of prospects, while bragging about how many admirers she and Yoon had back in their college days. The sisters even tried their hand at matchmaking by suggesting that their neighborhood friend Shin had grown into a very beautiful woman who would be perfect for their little brother. Jin-young was internally screaming with horror at the thought of seeing his eccentric friend in a romantic light because he knew far more about her sussy personality than his sisters ever would. He decided it was best to just let them ramble, as the weight of the day began to take its toll on everyone. Before long, Hana had completely passed out on the floor, leaving Jin-young to wonder how she could have been so confident about her stamina just moments before. As he prepared to move her to the comfort of the bed, he was stopped by a very flushed and very warm Yoon, who seemed to be having a significant reaction to the heat of the room. She claimed she was absolutely burning up and began to prepare her layers with a level of confidence that left her brother stunned. She made it clear that she intended to get much more comfortable right then. The morning sun began to filter through the resort windows as Hana slowly opened her eyes to the peaceful sound of birds chirping outside. Her head felt like a construction site, and she realized with a groan that she had definitely overdone it with the convenience store beverages the night before. She sat up and rubbed her eyes, trying to piece together the blurry events that led to her waking up alone in the large hotel bed. Scanning the quiet room, she spotted Jin-young sprawled out on the floor in a sleeping position that looked both uncomfortable and entirely ridiculous. Despite her throbbing headache, she couldn't resist the urge to document the moment, deciding that his undignified state would make for perfect blackmail material once they were back home. She sat there for a moment in silence, wondering why her memories of the previous night felt so heavy and confusing. As the fog in her mind began to clear, a series of very vivid and highly sussy images started to surface from her subconscious. She recalled a scene where Jin-young was carrying a very sleepy Yoon toward the bathroom, what looked like a session of high-intensity steam cardio. The memory was filled with the sound of running water and the sight of her siblings sharing a level of cardio session that seemed to defy every boundary she understood. Hana felt a surge of internal panic as she tried to determine if these were actual memories or just a very creative hallucination brought on by her lack of alcohol tolerance. She tried to convince herself that it must have been a weird dream because the alternative was far too complicated for her to handle before her first cup of coffee. The details felt far too realistic to ignore, yet the house was now so quiet that it was hard to believe such chaos had occurred just a few hours earlier. By the time they were settled on the train for the journey home, Hana was still struggling with a massive headache and a lingering sense of unease. She leaned her head against her hand and stared out the window, hoping that she hadn't made a total fool of herself in front of her younger siblings while she was under the influence. Her brain felt like a jumbled mess of half-remembered events and images that kept playing on a loop. One particular vision kept haunting her, involving a moment where Jin-young and Yoon were sharing an incredibly intense and active cardio connection right in front of her while she was supposedly passed out. The sheer boldness of the encounter in her dream left her feeling flustered and more than a bit curious about what actually happened while she was asleep. She glanced over at her siblings, searching for any sign of guilt or shared secrets in their expressions. Yoon looked as bright and innocent as ever as she clung to Jin-young's arm with a satisfied smile, eventually waking up just enough to wonder if she had done anything embarrassing while she was drunk. Hannah watched them with a mix of suspicion and exhaustion, realizing that her sweet sister was either a master of disguise or truly as clueless as she appeared. She decided that, for the sake of her own sanity, she would have to believe it was all just a fever dream, even if her intuition suggested that her siblings were hiding a brand new level of cooperation from her. Yoon had a secret plan up her sleeve and invited Jin-young to a mysterious better place for the following day. Jin-young soon found himself standing in the middle of a colorful classroom as Yoon introduced him to a group of excited toddlers as their guest teacher for the day. While Jin-young had been dreaming of a sussy afternoon, he was instead met with a round of tiny applause and curious stares. One bold student even wondered if the two were a couple, prompting a blushing Yoon to clarify that Jin-young was merely her handsome younger brother. Jin-young tried to swallow his disappointment and agreed to help out since his own college schedule was empty for the afternoon.